Good
Good
morning.
morning, Srinivas. Good morning,
Good morning.
Rajan. I think we, two of us,
Yes.
Srinivas and myself, we are in Mumbai and Rajan is in Noida. So this is a session where we are having a dialogue with Srinivas on C plus coaching. And the topic will be spearheaded by Rajan. And we would like to introduce Srinivas Nagappa, who has more than 38 plus years of experience now. Yeah, and if you see that there are clear ways in which he has progressed his career from Unilever as a practicing manager, rising up to the position of a CEO of businesses, to coming into the other companies, Indian business houses, where he has been able to spearhead them in their strategy and operations. And now, over the last now about, say, a decade or so, he is full-fledged into executive coaching as such. So that is the wide variety of experience that he brings to the area of coaching. And we have had interaction with Srinivas for the last, say, about now close to about a year or so. And we would like him to give his opinion, his views, his experiences, his insights and thoughts as to how coaching would be useful for and distinctive from the other coaching that one is, familiar with, as far as the coaching for C plus people are concerned. Rajan would spearhead the conversation, and over to you, Rajan.
Thank you, Amal. And I was excited about this opportunity of talking to Srinivas. He has lots of experience in C level and C plus coaching. And I was very curious on getting my own doubts and perceptions clarified. And thank you, Srinivas, for this opportunity, giving this opportunity and your time. So let me begin with the first question itself. How do you see C-level coaching different from executive coaching in general?
Thank you for that, Rajan and Amal. In response to your question, how is coaching at the C-suite level different from coaching at the other level? I would say it's really a spectrum and it's a continuum. And there are different points on the continuum that as coaches, we run initiatives and intervene. Nevertheless, just like you have any spectrum of ultraviolet light and the wavelengths are different and stuff like that, I would really say that when we are looking at coaching mid-level sort of executives, the one thought that comes to my mind is I need to work with the person to help unlock resources. Resources that might exist within himself or herself, resources around them, etc., etc. And we can talk about that in some depth. When I go further down the spectrum into the CXOs and people who are leading companies, I think I'm making a small shift into influencing and impacting as being the big part that probably I need to give them a little nudge on, I need to give them a little support on, etc., etc. Does it mean that at the C-suite, you're not necessarily looking to unlock resources? Obviously not, because like I said, it is the same spectrum. However, the fact is that that whole bit about influencing and impacting becomes such a big part at the C-suite. Because at the end of the day, that job is really about connecting the dots. It is about examining the implication of an action in one part of the business on the rest of the business, right? And that's not necessarily something that a functional leader at the mid-senior level would always be so taken up with. It's more about understanding the implication and therefore having an overall view that you carry forward. The last bit that I'll just mention before I pick up your thoughts on that is that compared with mid-level sort of coaching, coaching at senior levels is extremely, well, one is dealing with an extremely lonely person because there are very few people you can bounce your thoughts off. Who does a CEO bounce his thoughts off or her thoughts off? Yeah, we all say that the board is technically a big resource, and I'm a strong advocate that every CEO, every MD must use the board as a resource, not only as a policeman, auditor, parent, headmaster, etc., as unfortunately we often use, but as a resource. But even beyond that, there is a limit. The CEO can't keep going back to the board and saying, let me bounce these couple of thoughts off you. I'm not very clear about it, etc. Similarly, the CEO can't keep going back to his or her team to say, hey, guys, I'm not very clear. Give me your thoughts, because again, that stirs a whole different set of emotions in the team. So what really comes across is at the CXO level, certainly at the CEO level, it's a very, very lonely job. Nothing new. I'm sure you've heard this many times, but I actually see this in action, and therefore I work especially hard in terms of addressing it, right? So just to sum up, while it's the same spectrum, the two big differences is at the slightly lower level, I'm looking to help them unlock resources. At the more senior level, I'm looking to help them influence and impact, keeping in mind that the context they are operating in is a difficult one and a lonely one.
Hmm. How do they respond to coaching? Are there any special challenges when you talk to C-level people?
Well, I think there are always challenges. And the starting point is, and I say this to everybody, and probably both of you have also heard me say it many times, change is difficult. Change in adults is doubly difficult. Change in successful adults is quadruply difficult, right? And all the people that I have been so fortunate to work with are all hugely talented, hugely successful professionals and beautiful human beings also in, I would say, all the cases. And therefore, they don't need me to come along and give them gyan, right? If I was talking to a hobo, a homeless person on the streets, he or she would probably look at me and say, okay, the guy looks reasonably well dressed, getting out of a car. Maybe I should listen to what he or she says because there should be some benefit because it's clearly worked for this guy. That's not the case with the people that we all work with. They are hugely successful. So, what's the first challenge? The first challenge is for them to appreciate that their success mantra, which got them here, is not necessarily in its entirety going to get them somewhere else, right? And I think that's the first thing that really is the challenge. I think one of the biggest challenges is helping the leader assess what's still valuable going forward. Right? I don't know if all of you played sport. I used to follow hockey in the 80s and the 90s, and you're probably aware India, you had this tradition of winning hockey Olympic golds, and then suddenly it fell off the table. Why? Because this short penalty or the penalty corner was introduced, and the Europeans became so good at it, and we were still stuck in our old tradition of field goals, and suddenly we fell off the curve until we decided to get that and bring it up. So for some years in time, just like the Indian hockey team, many of our leaders live in denial. They believe, yeah, it didn't work today, but sure, it'll work tomorrow because it's time tested, etc. But a coach's real role is not necessarily to debunk that it is wrong. Obviously, it's not 100% wrong, but to also keep re-examining, is it really adding value? And I think that's the single biggest challenge.
One of the issues which comes up very often for organizations when they ask for a coach, especially at senior levels, they want somebody who has a similar experience. And the general impression is that many organizations, when they are looking for mentors, they ask for coaches. So they say coaching, but they expect mentoring. What is your view on that? Does it happen like that quite often, and how do you resolve these variances, if not contradictions, in expectations and the professional so-called ICF? I mean, I'm saying so-called in the sense that we are trained to think of coaching in a certain way, which is slightly different from the expectations of many organizations. What is your,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. So let me, if I may, with your permission, Rajan, answer that question in two parts.
yeah,
First, in terms of the contrast or comparison between mentoring and coaching. And the second part, which is, I know you didn't use those words, so I'm putting words in your mouth about, do you need a coach who's been there, done that?
yeah,
Meaning experience those turmoils, or can somebody who's not experienced it also be a good enough coach, right?
yeah,
And and let me tell you, obviously I am biased, right? Because I'm a practitioner for many, many years. So please take my answer with a couple of pinches of salt, right? More than one pinch, certainly, right? So let me come back to that in terms of mentoring versus coaching, the first part. Is there an overlap? Yes, there is an overlap. Is there a difference? Yes, there is a very distinct difference. The way I see it, and this is my definition, open to correction, is that a mentor typically, apart from providing a whole lot of other skills, is primarily about two things. One is support to the individual, and second, help in navigating the organization. Right? And that is why a mentor, who is typically a senior person in the organization, is valuable to say that, these couple of things are not going to work in our organization for whatever good reasons, or our culture is like this, and therefore you need to be slightly different, etc. And these are hugely valuable things that the mentor brings to the table. He or she is also almost always a more senior person, and typically is more respected and looked up to. And therefore, I would say that two-way dialogue between the person being mentored and the mentor is somewhat limited, because the mentor is the fountainhead of wisdom, understanding, experience, etc., and has clearly lived that life and been hugely successful. The coach doesn't necessarily have to be the fountainhead of wisdom. You refer to the ICF competencies. And certainly, as an ICF coach or as any coaches, we are not going to start imposing our solution saying, okay, can you just please keep quiet and listen to me? This is the way to do it. Make notes. Obviously not. A mentor might say that.
yeah,
A mentor might say that, right? A mentor might very easily say, okay, you have these two options in our organization. I think this will fly and this will not. A mentor could say that. I don't think a coach necessarily should be going down that path. Sure, he should help to evaluate, etc., etc., but not necessarily be the final arbiter of that call, right? I also believe that a coach is somebody that the coachee should push back with and say, hey, coach, you're saying this, or you're leading me into this way of thinking. I'm not completely sure. Some mentors can take it. I don't think that's necessarily a very worthwhile way to go down with your mentor to say, mentor, I think you've got it wrong. I don't think that's recommended. Is with a coach? Certainly, yes. So I would say a couple of those things. I think the value of a coach is that you can use the coach as a sounding board without necessarily the sounding board being the final authority. Can't always do that with your mentor. Sure, with some you can, but not always, right? Plus the other bit about navigating the organization, knowing the power centers, knowing how different people work, the coach is unlikely to be able to bring that dimension because he or she is not inside the organization and doesn't know the organization so very well, right? So that I would say would be the first part of your coach versus mentor. Do both have their values? Absolutely, they both have their values. Just because you have a coach, please don't give up your mentor. A mentor is hugely valuable as well. Let me
yeah.
come to the second. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, please.
Sorry, I mean, what I wanted to ask, see, this kind of polarity is at two levels. First of all, negotiating with the organization first, that they would like somebody to coach and they would like a coach to be what you said, been there, done that. So that's one thing. The second, of course, as you have lucidly explained in terms of how does a coach navigate the role with the coachee, and keeping aside expectations of a typical mentor and performing the coach's role. So, what about the first one? I mean, how does one navigate this variance between expectations? Because very often the people who decide that a coach should be hired may not be very familiar with the expectations and so-called rules of the game of coaching.
Absolutely. I think that is very fair. So, like I said, let me give you my biased answer because I have a leaning towards the answer.
Unconscious
Is it
bias.
a conscious bias? Exactly. Does that make it better or worse? I don't know, but but it is a conscious bias. Yes, good.
Yeah.
And this becomes a disclaimer almost. Okay.
Yeah.
My sense is it's very, very hard for somebody to do two things. One, empathize, and B, build credibility in the other person. Empathize, meaning from me to you, and build credibility in you. Right? So, two different parts of it. It's very difficult to do both if there hasn't been a fair level of experience.
Hmm.
Does it necessarily have to be 100% ditto if I'm coaching an IT chief? Should I have spent 29 years in IT? No.
Hmm.
But should I have a sense of what are the pulls and pushes and the pressures and tensions of his or her job? Should I have a sense of how navigating or managing a large organization versus a small organization is?
Hmm.
Should I have a sense in terms of how can one build the company image beyond just my narrow confines? Yes,
Hmm.
it helps greatly if we already have some experience of that. It helps greatly.
Hmm.
The second part that helps greatly is in terms of an experience of different situations. And I'm talking primarily of difficult situations. Good situations, happy situations, all of us are very good at managing,
Hmm.
right? Although I think many of us don't have the grace also to manage the good situations. To that extent, I don't know if you saw Djokovic at his victory speech when he won Wimbledon just a couple of days ago, started with congratulating Nick, his opponent, right? And everybody does it, but this guy did it with grace. This guy did it not as an afterthought, which a lot of people do. And by the way, I'd like to congratulate the guy who just lost to me. Good fight, man, good fight, and you have places to go. It's almost an afterthought.
Yeah.
Djokovic started with that, right? And therefore, that whole ability in terms of being there, done that, in terms of difficult situations, in terms of appreciating that, sure, I've got a good result because I'm good, but I think there were other contributors also to that, right? That takes a little bit of maturity and so on. So I bumped into this very erudite lady from the US who's all of 23 years old,
Hmm.
very erudite, very capable, beautiful talker, and clearly somebody you should look up to. And she's a life coach.
Hmm.
And I scratched my head and said, life coach at age 23, Ivy League, best of everything. And while you obviously have a lot of skills, not that I said this to her, I thought, I'm going to wonder, would I want to be coached by you as a life coach? Have you seen enough ups and downs? Have you, in a way, been there, done that, even though you don't not an Indian, even though you haven't lived my life, even though you may not be an FMCG or a coach usta, whatever it is, but have you sort of lived life? And therefore, that been there, done that, I'll come back to redefine a little bit in
Hmm.
terms of lived elements of the other person's life. I think that's very important. That's very, very important, right?
Hmm.
And therefore, when I look at coaches who are typically in one particular area of typically, let us say, that's not necessarily been a line function and so on, and they now become coaches. My sense is they probably have to work doubly hard to one, understand what the other person is going through. Second, to build credibility in the other person's eyes. And again, I say it with no pride, but very often when I talk to people who've come up through sales, they tell me, Srinivas, you will relate to this because you are also a former sales and marketing person. Or you'll relate to this, you've been a CEO, so you know how this works. And obviously, I don't dispute it, but I also wonder, what if I didn't have some of those attributes which seem to build credibility in their eyes? What if I had not gone through that in some way and therefore didn't have that empathy to feel? So I would say, again, my biased view for people who are looking to recruit coaches, recruit coaches who have a wealth of experience, not necessarily the same thing, not necessarily the same industry. I mean, I coach a lot of e-commerce people. Growing up, when I was growing up in my early years, what was e-commerce, right? It didn't exist. But the whole understanding of how a business works, how people work, how one builds institutions, how one builds reputation, I think it's a value if the coach has gone through much of this. Which is why the mentor is so valuable, because he or she has actually gone through much.
Okay.
Sorry, long answer to your short question.
No, it's very useful.
Rajan, if you may permit me, I have a question for Srinivas.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, Srinivas, you see, there is the client, and then there is the coachee, and there is the coach. There are three, elements to this entire thing as to how it will pan out. How often do you find yourself in a quandary, so to say, that what is the expectation the client has from the engagement? The coach has a certain view, that is where he is on the table. The third is the person who is the coachee. He may be a reluctant coachee, or he may be a coachee with certain expectations which may not match with the organization's expectations also. In a situation like this, how often do you find yourself navigating and coming to terms with drawing the terms of reference? So your insights into this, that is something I would like to look for.
Very important question. And added to that, if I may, sometimes a coachee may see coaching, the company's desire to assign a coach as a sign of reflection, adverse reflection on that person's performance. That's that's also one thing. On the other hand, certain organizations, they talk as if fixing this person, that yaar isko kuch kar do. That is the other extreme. So yes, Srinivas, please.
Absolutely, and I think both of you have pretty much underlined the real dilemma that happens, and it's a major dilemma at the same time. And I think maybe I'm a little simplistic, but my belief is that there are simple answers to major dilemmas very often. We often overcomplex it. So the simplest way, whenever I get a sense that there may be pieces that are sticking out at odd angles or causing stress, I typically ask all the parties to be on the same table. So, for example, if I give you a real life situation of just a week ago, I was asked by this board to help this ManCom member, management committee member. So obviously the executive who's running, one of the executives who's helping to run the company. And I was told that he's an extremely high profile person, clearly going to go places. And can you just help? And I gave my usual spiel about, I work on developmental activities, not remedial, like you said, fix it, Rajan. That was the phrase you use, and I hear this so often. Yes. So I did give my spiel, and the board said, absolutely, we see this person in 5 years as, being on top of the moon. So I said, great. When I spoke to this person, the coachee, and this was a pure chemistry conversation. And I usually start with these conversations after a little bit of an intro to say, how do you plan to use me? Because I'm a resource available to you. How do you plan to use me? And the entire conversation from the coachee was one about, yes, Srinivas, what you need to do for me is fix this person, fix that other person, fix the organization, fix the structure, fix this, fix that. And of course, I responded to say that I didn't have much of those powers, but nevertheless, we cut to a third conversation that I had, which is with this person's immediate line manager, who's also on the board. And the line manager had a very different view that this person was high potential. According to the line manager, no. The person was doing a job reasonably, but not high potential. So you can see this dilemma, right? Board says, come in and coach high potential. Immediate manager says, okay, average sort of person, but do fix a few things. The coachee himself says, hey, Srinivas, there's nothing wrong with me. You please go out and fix all these other people. Right? A very interesting dilemma. And it's from about 10 days, 8, 9 days ago, this conversation. I say it with no pride because it reflects poorly on my capability. I am still trying to get all the parties on the same table. Because I have said very clearly, there are multiple viewpoints emerging. I am unclear about what my task is. And you can't just unleash me and say, go and do your best. I mean, that doesn't work. What am I supposed to work on, right? As of now, just before this conversation, I got a text message saying that this evening at 6:30, all the three parties are going to be at the table. So I hope I get somewhere, but it's taken me multiple prods, nudges, pushes to say, I want everybody on the table. And I've already sent out a mail also to say, this is what I'm going to discuss so that there nobody has a surprise. Right. So I've come back to say I'm actually seeing a dichotomy. I'm seeing two different opinions. I'm seeing one party saying that this is high potential, not naming them, and the other party saying this is not necessarily high potential. I am seeing angst. I am seeing the desire to fix other things which are outside my capability. So I think that's very important that the coach does not assume the role of God and the Buddha and all those mighty people, and says, yeah, theek hai, I can go into this, I'll fix it as I go along. If the brief is unclear, if the parties are unclear in terms of how they can use the coach, I think it behoves the coach, before accepting the offer or the initiative or the assignment, it behoves the coach to probe much further and get everybody to agree on what is desired outcome. Because otherwise you will have multiple definitions of success and none of them may be valuable to the coach, right? So I think that is so very important in terms of this one conversation. One last point that I'd just like to make, and this is primarily for all the, maybe you'll have some of the leaders also listening into this. I almost always ask the leader of the coachee to give me feedback on the coachee before we start, with the coachee present. And again, I'm sad to say it doesn't happen in a majority of the cases. And we have all very good excuses, busy, matching calendar, schedules and all, which I just call excuses, right? And the moment that doesn't happen, my antenna go up, because I'm then saying that, hey, in this organization, probably giving candid feedback is not quite the thing. My antenna go up because I say probably the leaders of the coaching are not used to giving candid feedback. My antenna goes up because I say maybe the coachee has never heard candid feedback,
Mm,
right? And all of these things can conspire.
mm,
So the moment that happens, and I tell this to the leader also, usually the board or so on, to say, I'm a little disappointed that we are not having this conversation with the coachee there, because look at my situation, and I'm looking at it purely selfish. I'm going to go back to the coachee and say, your board thinks you're not so good at this and this. And the coachee saying, oh, what the hell? In my last appraisal, which was just 2 months back, they said I am an outstanding stalwart at these very two same things that you're talking. And then I am there sitting defending some third party's view to the coachee who's not willing to take it. And I tell this to the board. I say, you're needlessly putting me in this situation.
mm,
I
mm.
don't appreciate it.
Yeah.
So am I going to change the world? Never. But can I at least make these small steps towards changing the view of one or two of these people, such that the next coach and the next coachee have a better time? Probably worth it.
Good.
Sometimes
Thank you.
thank you. Yes, Amal, you wanted to add something or?
Yes, I think very succinctly put by Srinivas, and this is a clear way in which organizations have to align themselves with the assignment, because this is an initiative, a change initiative. And the change initiative, the alignment part of it, much of it would depend on the maturity of the coach as to how he is able to navigate the different points of view, the interests as such. And once that has been done, you are then there. Then you are ready to steer the initiative. Otherwise, it may take a little longer time before you can come to that. And it is much better rather than hastily getting into it. And then you are inevitably drawn into lots of jams in between, you know. So the whole perspective of this initiative gets lost. It's a very different than, a game altogether. And thank you, Srinivas, for your inputs.
Mm. Sometimes the chief executive who is seeking coach, uh, in the sense that he's the decision maker or the sponsor, as well as the coachee.
Yes.
So such when such people should go for coaching and when they should go for mentoring. What is your perspective on that?
That's an interesting one. That's an interesting one. So I typically look at this as not an either or. I look at it as they should probably have a coach, but equally a mentor is hugely valuable, right?
Mm,
A mentor is hugely valuable. And in my course of my career, I've been fortunate to have chairman of the board and so on who've been fairly senior, who've actually provided that guidance. And I think I have benefited greatly from it. But coming back to the point about let's say a coach for a CEO, where the decision maker as well as the coachee is pretty much the same. I would certainly say I'd request the CEO to also get an other opinion, right, in
mm,
terms of the suitability of the coach. Because otherwise, what happens, and I think all three of us have seen many of these cases,
mm,
you complete an assignment, the coachee says, the coach was wonderful. We had some brilliant conversations. I still cherish some of those moments.
mm,
Very nice. It helps all our egos. And then if you ask the difficult question, thank you for that, but how has the organization benefited?
mm,
And we all are scratching our heads and sort of wondering how has the organization benefited? And somebody is saying, hey, you two guys said you had a brilliant set of conversations. Yeah, so where's the value?
mm,
And that brings me back to the whole point about coaching cannot, must not, should not be an HR initiative.
mm,
It has to be a business initiative. It has to translate into dollars and rupees and whatever your currency is. It has to translate into something which is sustainable and not finished with the coach. Everybody's gone back to their old behaviors.
mm,
Yeah, I think it's a waste of money. It's a waste of time, right? And therefore, when I do talk to decision makers who are also CEOs, who are also going to take that call, I ask them 2 or 3 questions. Not so much for my understanding, but more for them to start thinking and reflecting. And the first one is, why do you really need help? Why do you need a coach? And you'll be amazed, even these very, very intelligent people have usually the wrong reasons, right? And there are occasions when I've actually said, you know what, while I will be honored to be your coach, I don't think you need one at this point.
Right.
Maybe in 6 months, maybe in 2 years, let's talk again. I'm honored to be somebody who was considered by you. But if you ask me, I don't think you need a coach. What you need is maybe a mentor, maybe somebody else, etc., etc. Right? So ask the first question in terms of what will you really get out of it? Second, how well is it measurable? Because if it can't be measured, we are talking in the air, right? You can always say, yes, yes, I think his or her interpersonal skills have improved, but if we can't measure it, what are we talking about, right? It becomes your call and my call and not necessarily a universal call. The third thing I ask is, how will you use me to embed those changes, which is the sustainability of the change that we make, such that when I finish with you and move on and we only meet once in 6 months for coffee or New Year or whatever, those changes that we embedded some time back are still there, or are they just gone, right? And therefore, when you ask these 2-3 questions, especially to leaders at senior levels, you don't then need to also say, by the way, are you really willing to make the effort? Are you willing to sort of go walk that extra mile and so on? It's implied, because obviously you can't embed those new behaviors without a significant effort, without conviction, all of those other things, right? So that is something which I would certainly ask. The last question that I would ask is, again, if you look at, and you guys are trained psychologists, so I'm going to say this with a lot of care, but we like to do business with people we like. We like to do business with people who are like us. Unfortunately, that second one of who are like us takes whole diversity out of the equation and makes a mess, because we are not looking at diverse thoughts coming in, right? I don't look at diversity as only gender or religion or race or color or so on. It is diversity of thought. Because of my different upbringing, I bring a different perspective, which is hugely, hugely valuable, right? So because we like to do business with people who are like us, and we like to do business with people who we like, we tend to narrow our focus of resources we can tap into, and I'm talking of a coach as a resource, right? And I always ask that person, hey, you say at the end of the day, I'm happy to work with you, Srinivas. Is it because we have similar backgrounds? Is it because, we work with similar type of companies? Is it because I started my career in sales and marketing and so did you? Is it because? And I just want that other person to say, am I needlessly narrowing the field versus allowing myself to far more different, better exposures? So to the CEOs who are coaches, who are the final decision makers, these are the 3, 4, 5 questions that I ask.
Very interesting. And it also throws up certain learnings for the coaches. Expanding on this only, on what are other learnings you'd like to share with other coaches? What things to focus, what things to avoid?
Okay, that's a difficult one, because you are assuming then I have a plethora of learnings to share. But let me go along with that, and thank you for being kind. We all start as coaches, or certainly in our coach training or early in our lives. We have this thing about going in with a completely blank mind interpreted as no judgments, blank mind interpreted as I am only there to serve the coachee. My sense is there's nothing wrong with those 2 statements. What is wrong is to be able to practice it and therefore put it into real life. And therefore, I have some takes on this. Do I, for example, go in with a completely blank mind when I'm going to meet a coachee? Certainly not. Did I try? Yes, I tried and failed. Do I think it's necessarily the right thing? The answer is, from my perspective again, no. I need to have an opinion. However, that opinion should be coming not as a judgment, but as something to be explored further. Right? You keep hearing this phrase about curiosity versus judgment, right? And that's exactly what I'm coming across. I cannot, as a coach, go in saying, I think this person needs to be fixed with A and B, and I think he or she is good at C, and I don't want to worry about D. No, I'm not a doctor making that diagnosis. So, should I have a thought? Yes. Should I have a very clear diagnosis going in and a judgment? No. My sense is, have a look at all the data, put all the conversations together, have a few viewpoints which are arising out of curiosity rather than judgment, but this blank mind and there only to serve whatever the client wants, I'm not completely sure. Because very often, even the client is not very sure of what he or she wants. And it is our job as coaches to help them get that clarity. So I don't think we should be going in with that very clear judgment. Similarly, coaches often tell me, I think I need help on A and B. And I add that to my bank of things that need to be explored. I don't say, great, I'm so happy that you have self-diagnosed. Now let's get started. No, right? And it's sometimes a temptation for, especially for a new coach or for a coach who's so concerned about establishing himself or herself, to say, good, you've come with these two problems, let's start with that. But those may be symptoms, those may not even be problems, etc., etc. Right?
Yeah.
So that's where I would come from as a very simple thing. Sure, be present, but do your research, look at thoughts, which is why, and prior to this conversation, Rajan, you and I were talking of some psychometric tools. There is this body of coaching which says, I don't want to bias myself by looking at this psychometric. I don't want to bias myself by looking at their 360. Yeah. And I have a different viewpoint, and I say, well, I need to have the ability not to bias myself, but it's certainly information that's available which could help. And therefore, I need to be open to it.
Wonderful.
So, for example, if I ask the coachee, how good are you with people? And they say, my people think of me as the best. I would actually challenge and say, but by the way, and because I always, all these reports, psychometric or 360 are all, I make it a point that it's routed through the coaching, not comes directly to me as an extra piece of information from somebody else. I say, well, okay, you sent me a 360. I looked at it. There seem to be these 3-4 areas where you're working with people seems to be called into question. How is it then that you are saying you're at the top of the game as far as that skill is concerned? So there is a challenge that I need to bring, not from a judgment of, come on, don't pull wool over my eyes. You are actually rotten at people. Look at your 360. Don't give me this crap. That would be a judgment.
Wonderful. You have answered the question, the next question that I wanted to ask, even without my asking it. Brilliant. Okay.
Saved you some time, Rajan. Saved you some time.
You were associated with when you got associated with ACN, and I guess that you must have done some research or some exploration of what the Health Organization is all about. What did you like in ACN that apart from the personal connect with Amal? I mean, what was your initial impression about ACN?
So a couple of thoughts there, which I found as definite positives. One, of course, is the personal connect, and personal connect plays a very big role in all of this.
Absolutely.
So that was certainly something, the personal connect with Amal and then you, Rajan, certainly helped significantly. The second thing that I liked was that you're clearly in this for the long haul. You were not looking to say, good, there is some revenue target, June quarter is coming up, let's get this fixed and move on. There is clearly an association with the organization on the one hand, with the coach on the other hand, for the longer haul. And that, I think, is something which is hugely, hugely valuable, and something that I certainly look at. By the way, I've been in touch with each and every one of the people I have coached over the years. And we touch base either through email. I still link up occasionally for coffee. There was somebody I finished coaching in 2015, and we had a beer just over the weekend, right? And there's no business that's happening with that person, but it's just that connect. And that's so very valuable to me as an individual. It helps me get a different perspective, grow, etc. And of course, the beer is always welcome. The other bit that I thought, apart from the personal connect and the long haul, was there's an interesting bit of, I would say, a combination. I don't claim to know the exact mix of that combination, but there is a combination of obviously doing business and matching coaches with organizations, as well as a little bit about the learning and the research bit, right? And I thought that was an interesting piece about it, because I certainly see it as an opportunity for me to pick up something from the experience, the research that you guys have done. And there's obviously, because of the Asia link, something about Asian values being brought into our coaching. Are they valuable? I think they are valuable. But at the same time, would I debunk Western value? Probably not. Every culture brings something to the table, and it is for us to pick up the best of it. So from an Asian value, I would certainly say, yes, I would look at the person and assess, is there only one direct style of working, or should I go a little softer, because that may help the coachee to open up. Similarly, for example, there are Asian values in terms of respect for the other person, which has to come through, come what may, regardless of the culture, however cut and dry I am. Let's not forget that even the very, very cut and dry person from a very, very Western culture, whom we may typify as, being very task oriented, is touched when we show respect, is angered or upset when we don't show respect, right? And everybody responds to it differently. Everybody portrays it differently. But we have to appreciate that that's core. That's so very core to us. The other bit, I think, which also works from, which I appreciated from an ACN perspective, is the fact that what we are doing really, and cross-culturally and so on, and you and I are working on a couple of assignments outside of India also, obviously, is the fact that there is a huge, huge focus or weightage, let's say weightage, in terms of the background of the person being coached, the organizational background, which I think is so very important, because different organizations work in very different ways, right? And I think that is something which all of us learn to be flexible about. And I like the bit in terms of that approach which the two of you bring to the table as well.
Fantastic. It has been so enriching talking to you that we practically lost sight of the fact that we have taken so long a time. And
yes, undoubtedly, I mean, this was more enjoyable than I had thought of, in terms of learning and the perspective that you gave to some of the questions, which were very pointed. And I believe there is more which we can, dip into as we have some other sessions also. That's what.
Yeah. Amazing. And we are grateful that you
Thank you, Srinivas.
It's fun for me.
So much.